Hello from the cruel, brutal, capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur. Hope you're having an amazing day. Regardless, I'm not having an amazing day because, as you can see, I've injured myself. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to pussy out of making this video, because I promised myself that I would shoot a video on Tuesday, and shoot a video I will. As you can see, I've got my arm in a tourniquet, if that's how you pronounce that word, because I have unfortunately strained myself doing feats of manliness. Yes, to the extent that my physician has advised me not to go to the gym for the next 6 months. So for the next 6 months, I'll just be drinking alcohol and playing video games. Well, hashtag blessed. Okay, without further ado, let's begin. If you want to wish me a speedy recovery, you can wish me a speedy recovery in the comment section below. Sorry, my left arm is incapacitated. I can't move it. Yes, let's go. Yes, I shall never surrender. You see, the reactionaries can injure my body. Well, in this case, it's actually a self-induced injury. The reactionaries can kill my body, but they can never kill my soul, or the flame of liberation and social justice that burns in the heart of every socialist in the world. Shoot, coward, for you are only going to kill a man. So, as long as I have one functioning arm, as long as I have one arm that works, I will continue to oppose the cruel, brutal, savage and barbaric capitalist system with just my arm and my big mouth. Yes, there's not much I can do with this arm here, but I will never surrender. I will fight the reactionaries on the beaches, in the sea, in the landing grounds, in the dunya, in the akhirat, and I shall never surrender. So socialists have made their disdain for liberalism quite obvious. And unless you've been living under a rock, you're probably aware that there's no such thing as a liberal socialist. That is an oxymoron. Because liberal and left-wing are two separate things altogether. In fact, liberalism has a lot more in common with right-wing ideology than leftism does. So, socialists, in case you haven't realized by this point, are not big fans of liberals. Some of us even think that liberals get the gulag first, before the open reactionaries, because liberals, by and large, support the status quo, they support the capitalist status quo, they support the imperialist status quo, but they merely want to change the people in power, meaning that more women, more people of color, and more LGBT people in positions of oppression. Like, for example, when you have Israel, the bastion of liberalism, not leftism. Israel is a right-wing reactionary country, but it's also a liberal country, saying that, you know, we're very, very inclusive. We give everybody, no matter whether you're man, woman, gay, trans, the opportunity to wear a uniform and get a weapon and to go and kill innocent Palestinian people. That's what you get the opportunity to do if you are in Israel. So, the thing is, liberalism fundamentally does not want to dismantle the status quo, it merely wants to make adjustments to the status quo. Fundamentally, liberals do not see anything wrong with capitalism, but rather, liberals want more minorities and more women and LGBT people in oppressor positions, in reactionary positions. For example, they may say they want more women CEOs, they may want more gay people in the army to go and kill innocent people overseas, they may want more minority representation in video games or movies, for example. But fundamentally, liberals are allergic not only to challenging the capitalist imperialist status quo, which they benefit from, because most liberals are urban, white-collar elites, but fundamentally, liberals are also allergic to class analysis because they see the world, even well-meaning liberals, see the world through an inherent lens of race and gender. So if you're a certain race or a certain gender or a certain sexuality, then you are by default oppressed, no matter where you are on the class hierarchy. You could be a bourgeois gay person or a bourgeois woman or a bourgeois ethnic minority, but you are still more oppressed than certain other groups, and vice versa. Now, I remember a few months ago, there was a case of a couple of Malaysian ethnic minority students who got into Harvard. Now, of this cohort of 4 students, not a single one of them was Malay. Now, as you know, race-based politics in Malaysia is a thing, and there is a legitimate grievance to be addressed in terms of how race-based politics has affected poor Chinese and Indian students in getting scholarships or in getting places at public university due to the priority on the Bumiputra quotas. Now, I've addressed this in other videos, so you can go check out my other videos on Malaysia. But there were liberals who happened to notice that in this cohort of students there was not a single Malay, and they were cheering and treating this as an example of how minorities have succeeded in Malaysia despite the setbacks that they have. In fact, I rubbed one of them the wrong way when I said this is such a fucking arrogant take, because, you know, why do you have to punch down on poor Malays just because you're angry at race-based politics? Why couldn't you just congratulate those 4 non-Malay kids without bringing race into the equation? It's like, for example, if a black guy gets into Harvard and you say, "Ha, black excellence, you know, take that, white people." That is fundamentally the liberal worldview. Well, not surprisingly, I got called commie scum by that liberal, because liberals are not fans of communists either. I'm not a communist, by the way, I'm a socialist, but liberals hate communism more than they hate the right wing. They consider communism or Stalinism to be even more oppressive than Christian theocratic fundamentalism in America. That's how liberals think. Unfortunately, liberals also have an allergy not only to class analysis, but an allergy to socialism of any kind. Because I don't think using kids from the most privileged strata of our ethnic minority community is basically a form of minority triumph over the majority. In fact, if you're thinking about race versus race, congratulations, you've already bought into the capitalist ruling class's game. You're basically playing the ruling class's game that tries to divide us according to race and religion. But to say that, you know, this is an example of why minorities are successful because they work hard and they don't waste time on nonsense, is basically, it's problematic to say that because these 4 kids come from very privileged backgrounds. I'm not downplaying their achievements. I'm not saying that because they came from privileged backgrounds, they couldn't have worked hard. Of course they worked hard to get into Harvard. But why couldn't you just congratulate them and just be done with it, instead of saying, this is an example of how minorities in Malaysia have succeeded despite the setbacks that have been placed on them. And the fact of the matter is that, no, this is not a good example, because with or without affirmative action, those 4 minorities would have succeeded no matter what, because they have already been born with a silver spoon. If you're going to Harvard, you have a silver spoon in your mouth already. It's got nothing to do with the fact that they're ethnic minorities, and everything to do with the fact that people who go to Harvard happen to be more privileged than other people. And it just so happens that there were no Malays in this cohort. But you had another liberal who jumped in to defend this guy, saying, oh, try to look at it from a different angle. You know, if a minority from an underprivileged background achieves success, you would want to congratulate them as well, right? That's exactly the point that I'm trying to make. These 4 ethnic minority kids in Malaysia, despite the fact that on paper, institutionally, they suffer from ethnic discrimination, these are not underprivileged kids. I'm going to say things that will make a lot of liberals in Malaysia very angry. I'm going to say something that will make a lot of liberals in Malaysia seethe and get very, very angry. But despite Ketuanan Melayu politics, despite institutionalized racism, if you were born into a bourgeois, Chinese or Indian family, you are more privileged than a Malay who was born into a poor family. Despite the fact that, you know, on paper, that Malay has an easier time getting into UiTM or getting scholarships than you, you are more privileged than the poor Malay if you are a Chinese or Indian person born into a rich or upper middle class family. Now, if we're going to compare the poor Malay to another poor Chinese or Indian, yes, the case could be made that the poor Malay is more privileged than the other poor Chinese or Indian. But you can't take the upper echelons of ethnic minority society or upper echelons of bourgeois women, the girl boss types, and use that as an example of minority or female triumph. Because fundamentally, it's not a very, it fails to take into account class analysis, right? Because it's true that the politics in our country have indeed enriched a certain type of people. However, there is a difference in who gets these goodies. Who gets these goodies are not necessarily who gets the lion's share of Bumiputra privileges is not going to be the poor Malays. It's going to be rich, connected Malays. Does that mean that it's better to be a poor Chinese than a poor Malay? Oh, of course not. But overall, you can't use an example of kids from the upper crust of society getting to Harvard and saying that this is why minorities can succeed, because we're willing to work hard, unlike the majority. That doesn't work. Or it's not a good analogy, or it's not a good comparison. And this is why I'm trying to say that the liberal analysis is lacking, because liberals do not view the world in terms of class. Basically, the liberal accuses me of being an apologist for Ketuanan Melayu or Malay supremacy, you know, because apparently I put forming class consciousness as a higher priority to dismantling Malay supremacy and basically, you know, making the system basically more like Singapore, where, you know, oppression is not based on race, but it's based on class. The thing is, though, that you can't abolish race-based politics unless you form a socialist base, because race-based politics are part of the superstructure that contribute to the capitalist base. Because without race-based politics, if you want to abolish race-based politics, you need to create a socialist base and basically, you know, put an end to the capitalist base. But no, liberals will not hear of that, because they still want to keep their capitalist class privileges. And yes, race-based politics do exist in Singapore. It's just that they're a lot sneakier and a lot more skilled at PR than we are, okay? You know, it might not be explicit, but it's implicit. But the thing is, you can't abolish race-based politics just like that without abolishing the capitalist base which it feeds, you see, because when the workers are divided and resentful and distrustful of each other, that is what contributes to the capitalist system, because the workers do not trust each other and the workers are at each other's throats. You see, don't you see? But no, liberals won't have any of that. They won't treat class as the primary contradiction, because it would go against their worldview, because their worldview is fundamentally classist. You see, they view the world in terms of which race or gender is more oppressed. And it never seems to basically enter their minds that perhaps if you were born into an ethnic minority but you have proximity to capital, you are protected by capital. And basically, you cannot be called underprivileged if you were born into a rich ethnic minority family, despite the fact that there is certainly institutionalized discrimination. You can't be said to be less privileged than someone from the majority who is born into a poor family. Liberals do not take class into account. They only treat the world in terms of black versus white, quite literally. So, for example, a white or Asian person in America, from the liberals' point of view, is more privileged than a black person. Even if that white or Asian person comes from a poor, very poor working class family, they are still more privileged from the liberals' point of view than the black person who comes from an upper middle class or bourgeois family. You see, it's the same thing in Malaysia. There's no way from the Malaysian liberals' point of view that a Chinese or Indian could be more privileged than a Malay on an individual basis, because the liberal in Malaysia views privileges in terms of race. Like, they don't understand that there are nuances to privileges. There are rich Chinese and Indians, and there are poor Malays who have basically fallen through the cracks of our country's policies. Their analysis is incomplete because liberals also lump women as one category, as one group. You know, for example, liberals see the problem of proletarian women and bourgeois women as one and the same. The problem is supposed to be men, right? But proletarian women, like janitors or street sweepers or rubbish collectors, they don't suffer from the same problems as bourgeois women, and proletarian women receive far less protection than bourgeois women. Yet liberals would have you believe that proletarian women and bourgeois women have one and the same problem. And it never occurs to them that a woman, a bourgeois woman, might also be the cause of proletarian women's problems. In the same way, bourgeois men are the cause of proletarian men's problems. For example, a capitalist woman is going to be more of a problem for a working class woman than a working class man will, generally speaking. Liberals are not necessarily opposed to the capitalist elitist status quo. No, they're not. But what they want to see is just more women or more sexual minorities or more ethnic minorities in positions of power. Now, you can argue that women and ethnic minorities and sexual minorities have been historically disenfranchised. Indeed, it would be nice to see more of these people getting upward mobility, especially in developing countries. But liberals fundamentally seem to miss the most important piece of the puzzle: class society. Because liberals fundamentally do not oppose class society, but rather they simply do not like the color palette of class society. And they do not oppose imperialism against countries that they deem to be less civilized, like maybe the country doesn't have very progressive attitudes towards LGBT. They have no problem with sending army men into those countries and being utterly brutal to those people that they deem subhuman, as long as the people doing the killing and bombing are not conservative right-wing men, but people who wave a rainbow flag. That is what makes liberalism so off-putting towards any socialist, any self-respecting socialist. Because liberals fundamentally do not oppose the status quo. Liberals are elitist, liberals have a hierarchical mind, but they merely want to change the color palette and the gender dynamics, or I should say the gender ratio of who's doing the oppressing, rather than destroying the whole system of oppression altogether, smashing up the capitalist system. So, as Pakatan Harapan crumbles under its contradictions, because Pakatan Harapan is an ugly mess of contradictions, there are going to be two factions that want to take over. There are going to be the overt right-wingers like Perikatan Nasional or PAS, but there are also going to be the liberal factions who say we should make Malaysia more like Singapore, a more, my arm, meritocratic society like Singapore. But the thing is, the liberal fundamentally basically does not want to dismantle class society. The liberal merely wants to turn things, wants to make things more quote-unquote meritocratic based on their own ideals, right? Fundamentally, the liberal wants more social freedoms, less religious repression, but they want to maintain a class society of oppressor and oppressed still. They still want an overclass and an underclass in society. That's why they're so averse to creating a class-conscious mentality in the masses, and they would rather people see the world in terms of race versus race or gender versus gender. And I hope it is clear that by this point you realize that liberalism will not save us, because liberalism poses as a progressive ideology, but fundamentally they do not want to destroy the system of oppression, which is class society. They don't want to take a hammer and smash class society up, but rather they simply want to do a management change, although they want to keep the base of society in check. They want to change the superstructure, so to speak, but they want to keep the base intact. So this is why the liberal analysis is incomplete, because it does not take class into account. Liberalism never takes class into account. And the fact of the matter is that the liberal has no concern or empathy towards people who are struggling, or people who are disenfranchised in society, if those disenfranchised people do not happen to meet the ethnic mold or the gender mold that they expect you to be. So that is why liberalism is very off-putting, because, you know, liberalism is basically anti-class based, or rather it goes against class consciousness. It goes against class consciousness, and it basically throws poor working class people of certain groups under the bus. And I just want to end this video by saying that, even the liberals' idea of a meritocratic society like Singapore is hardly what you would call meritocratic. Because, yes, it's true that there's no race-based politics, at least on paper, but regardless of race, regardless of what race you were born in, or what gender you were born to, if you were born rich, if you were born with a silver spoon, you could be a woman, you could be a gay person, you are basically born with a safety net that poor people don't have. So think of it this way. Even in a so-called meritocratic society, the meritocratic ideal society like Singapore, if you were born into a rich family, well, you can keep trying again and again and again until you succeed. Middle class kids, think of it as like throwing darts. Kids from the middle class families get one throw, regardless of what race they are. You know, the kids from the middle class families get one throw. The kids from the rich families get multiple throws because the parents have unlimited wealth to spare. But the kids from poor families, no matter what race they are, even if they be Malay or white, kids from poor families don't even get to throw any darts because they're the ones working at the dart carnival. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.